Take off those rags.
The rain hammered against the penthouse windows like bullets against bulletproof glass. Maureen Augustus stood shivering in the marble foyer, 80 floors above a city that had never wanted her. Water dripped from her threadbare coat onto stone that cost more than her mother's life. Her shoes, held together with duct tape and prayer, left wet prints she'd never be able to scrub away. The coat hung 2 sizes too big, sleeves covering hands she'd learned to keep hidden, to keep small, to keep from reaching for anything that wasn't hers. Victor, the driver who'd brought her here, stood behind her like a wall. His breath was steady, patient. His hand rested near her shoulder. Not touching, just there. "He'll be out in a minute," Victor said, voice flat. "Don't run. Girls who run don't make it to the elevator." She wasn't going to run. Running required somewhere to go. The penthouse stretched before her like a museum of other people's lives. Dark wood. Leather furniture that gleamed. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering sprawl, a galaxy she'd only ever seen from the bottom, looking up through grime and steel. The job posting had promised 10,000 cash. No questions asked. Just show up at this address at midnight. Maureen had known what that meant. What men like Joe Rem did to desperate girls. What happened in rooms this expensive, this far from anyone who'd hear you scream. She'd come anyway. Her mother needed the money by Friday or the hospital would stop the chemotherapy. Desperation didn't leave room for dignity. The shadows moved. Joe Rem emerged from the hallway like smoke taking shape, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in an immaculate black suit that probably cost what Maureen made in a year. Tattoos crawled up his neck, disappearing under his collar. His dark eyes swept over her once, cataloging damage the way a surgeon catalogs wounds. His presence filled the penthouse with something cold and controlled, something that made Victor straighten slightly, made the air itself feel thinner. He didn't speak at first, just studied her. The threadbare coat, the duct-taped shoes, the way she held herself, spine straight despite everything, chin up despite the trembling in her hands. Finally, his voice cut through the silence, low and calm.
Too calm.
"Take off those rags." Maureen's breath caught. There it was. This was what men like him did. This was the price. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her hands moved to her coat zipper, shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She'd known. She'd known. But knowing didn't make it easier. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. Joe's next words stopped her cold. "The bedroom on the left has a shower. Hot water. Clothes in the closet that'll fit you." He turned away, heading toward what looked like a study, dismissing her as if she were nothing more than a wet dog he'd brought in from the storm. His voice drifted back, flat and final. "Clean yourself up. You start work in an hour." Maureen stood frozen in the foyer, coat half unzipped, mind spinning through every possibility except the one that had just happened. Victor's hand finally touched her shoulder, gently, like guiding a child. "Go on," he said quietly. "He means it." She wanted to ask why. Why the clothes? Why the shower? Why any kindness from a man whose name people whispered like a curse? But her voice had abandoned her somewhere between the rain and the marble, somewhere between expecting cruelty and receiving something she didn't have a name for. So she walked toward the bedroom, leaving wet footprints behind her like evidence of a ghost who'd finally been allowed inside. The bathroom was larger than her entire apartment. Maureen stood in the doorway, one hand still gripping the frame, afraid that stepping inside would shatter whatever hallucination this was. Heated marble floors warmed her frozen feet through the duct tape and cardboard she'd stuffed in her shoes. A rainfall shower took up half the space, all glass and chrome. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with bottles she recognized from magazine ads, the kind of toiletries that cost more per ounce than she made per hour. She hadn't had hot water in 6 months. The building super had shut off her unit after she missed 2 months' rent. She'd been washing in gas station sinks, heating water in a kettle when she could afford the electricity. Her reflection in the mirror stopped her. Hollow eyes. Greasy hair pulled back in a knot. skin gray with exhaustion and malnutrition. The coat hung off her frame like a shroud. She looked like something that had already died but hadn't stopped moving yet. She stripped off the coat first, then the torn shirt underneath, the threadbare pants. Her hand shook so badly, she could barely work the buttons. The clothes fell to the heated floor in a damp pile, evidence of a life she was either escaping or about to pay for in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The shower handle turned smooth as silk. Water cascaded down, and when it hit her skin, it was so hot it almost burned. She gasped, stumbling forward, and then she was under it completely. Heat poured over her head, her shoulders, washing away layers of grime she'd stopped noticing. She scrubbed with the expensive soap that smelled like lavender, and something else, something clean and foreign. Scrubbed her skin raw. Scrubbed away the gas station bathrooms, the collection agency threats, the nights she'd chosen between food and her mother's medication. And then, for the first time in years, Maureen allowed herself to cry. Not the silent tears she'd learned to hide. Not the quick gasps she swallowed before anyone could see. Real crying. Sobbing that shook her whole body, sounds that echoed off marble and glass. She cried until her throat was raw, until the water ran cold, and then hot again, until she had nothing left inside. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel softer than anything she'd ever owned, the counter had been restocked. Unopened skincare products. A hairdryer still in its box. Makeup in shades that would actually match her skin tone. Someone had been in here while she showered. Someone had known exactly what she'd need. The bedroom door was open. The closet door wider. She crossed the threshold on bare feet, still dripping, and stopped. Inside the closet, designer clothes. Dresses in deep jewel tones. Dark washed jeans with tags still attached. Cashmere sweaters folded like art. Silk blouses on wooden hangers. Everything in her exact size, not an approximation, not close enough. Exact. She pulled on black jeans that fit like they'd been tailored to her body. A soft gray sweater that felt like being wrapped in a cloud. She didn't look at the price tags. Couldn't. The full-length mirror caught her as she turned. The woman staring back was a stranger. Clean hair falling in damp waves. Skin that looked alive again. Clothes that fit, that weren't torn or stained or held together with desperation. She looked like someone who belonged in a place like this. Someone who mattered. Maureen touched the mirror's surface, half expecting her hand to pass through glass and wake her up back in her freezing apartment. The reflection touched back. She found Joe in his study, a room that smelled like leather and old books and something darker she couldn't name. Dark wood paneling absorbed the light from a single desk lamp. Leather chairs sat positioned like sentries. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with books, but also with maps of the city, each one marked with colored pins she suspected told stories she didn't want to know. He sat behind a massive desk, drinking whiskey from a crystal glass, reviewing documents with the focused intensity of a man who couldn't afford mistakes. He didn't look up when she entered. Didn't acknowledge her presence at all. Just kept reading, one hand holding the glass, the other turning pages with deliberate precision. Sit. The word wasn't harsh. It was simply a fact. Maureen sat in the chair across from him, the gray sweater suddenly feeling too thin, the clean jeans not armor enough for whatever was coming next. Joe slid a manila folder across the desk without ceremony, without explanation. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, business licenses, employee rosters, financial statements for 3 hotels, 2 restaurants, and a construction company. All legitimate businesses, at least on paper. Your job, Joe said, still not looking at her, is to manage these. Scheduling, accounting, vendor relations, payroll. You're smart enough. I've seen your college transcripts. He took a slow sip of whiskey. 3.7 GPA before you had to drop out to take care of your mother. Maureen's breath caught. He'd investigated her. Dug through her life like it was just another file on his desk. Every failure, every desperate choice, laid bare for his inspection. You'll earn $5,000 a week, Joe continued, his voice steady as a knife drawn across whetstone. Your mother's medical bills will be paid in full by morning. The hospital will receive an anonymous donation covering her treatment through remission and beyond. The numbers didn't make sense. The kindness didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. Her voice came out fractured, barely more than a whisper. Why? Joe finally looked up. His dark eyes were unreadable, not cruel, not kind, just bottomless. He studied her face like he was searching for something specific, some quality he couldn't quite name. Then he stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked his city, his empire of glass and steel and blood. "Because you deserve better than the hand you were dealt," he said quietly, more to the window than to her. "And because I can." The simplicity of it was somehow more terrifying than any cruelty she'd prepared herself for. Men like Joe Rem didn't do things because they could. They did things because there was profit, leverage, control. There was always an angle. He turned back to face her, and his expression shifted into something harder, more businesslike. "You're free to leave anytime. The door isn't locked. No one will stop you." He paused, letting that sink in. "But if you stay, you follow my rules. You don't lie to me. You don't put yourself in danger. And you don't ask about the other side of my business." His eyes held hers. "The side that pays for all of this." "Understood." Maureen nodded, not trusting her voice. She understood perfectly. He was offering her a window into his world, just one window. The rest would stay dark, and she'd be expected to live with the shadows without asking what they contained. "Good," Joe said, returning to his desk. He picked up his whiskey, the conversation apparently over. "You start Monday. Victor will take you home now. Your mother's hospital will call in the morning." She stood on unsteady legs, clutching the folder like a lifeline. At the door, she paused, half turning back. "Mr. M." "Joe," he corrected, not looking up from his papers. "If you're going to work for me, use my name." "Joe," she repeated, testing the weight of it. "Thank you." He didn't respond, just kept reading, the whiskey glass catching lamplight like captured amber. But as she left, she could have sworn she saw his shoulders relax, just slightly, like something he'd been bracing against had finally stopped pushing back. If you believe in second chances and people who use their power to protect instead of harm, hit subscribe. Only the cruel and selfish won't. A week passed like water finding its level, slowly at first, then all at once settling into something that felt almost normal. Maureen managed Joe's businesses during the day, sitting in the study with spreadsheets and vendor contracts, finding that her abandoned economics degree hadn't abandoned her. The hotels needed scheduling restructuring. The restaurants had payroll discrepancies she caught within 2 days. The construction company's supply chain was hemorrhaging money to a fraudulent vendor. She fixed them all, methodically, finding purpose in the structure after years of chaos. Evenings were quieter. Dinners in the penthouse, sometimes with Joe, more often alone while he dealt with whatever happened in the shadows she'd agreed not to ask about. He'd return late, smelling like cigarette smoke and cold air, and find her reading in the living room. They'd exchange few words. A nod. Sometimes a brief report on the businesses. Then he'd disappear into his own wing of the penthouse, and she'd retreat to hers. It was almost peaceful, almost normal, until the night she found him standing in the doorway of her bedroom, staring at the open closet like it held ghosts he couldn't stop seeing. His expression was raw, unguarded in a way she'd never seen. No controlled menace. No careful distance. Just pain, naked and vast. Maureen froze, one hand still holding the book she'd been reading. "Joe." "These were Elena's," he said quietly, his voice scraped hollow. He didn't look at Maureen, only at the clothes hanging in perfect rows, the cashmere and silk she'd been wearing all week. "My wife. She died 3 years ago. Car bomb. Meant for me." The air left Maureen's lungs. The beautiful clothes suddenly felt like borrowed skin, like she'd been walking around in a dead woman's life, without knowing it. "She was about your size," Joe continued, his jaw working like he was chewing glass. "I couldn't," he stopped. Started again. "I couldn't get rid of them. Couldn't pack them up. Couldn't donate them. I just closed the door and pretended they weren't there." Maureen's chest tightened until breathing hurt. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. Joe's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping beneath the tattoos on his neck. He finally looked at her, and his dark eyes held something she couldn't name. Grief, maybe, or permission. But seeing them worn again. Seeing life in this place instead of just. He gestured vaguely at the penthouse around them, the museum of his grief. It helps. She would have liked you. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward into spaces Maureen didn't know existed between them. Joe turned to leave, his shoulders carrying weight she was only beginning to understand. Then he paused in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. He didn't look back, but his voice was steady when he spoke. You're not a replacement, Maureen. You're the first thing in 3 years that's made me feel like the world isn't just darkness and debt. Then he was gone, footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Maureen standing alone in a dead woman's clothes, surrounded by the ghost of a love so fierce it had survived 3 years of silence. She looked down at the gray sweater she was wearing, Elena's sweater, and for the first time, it didn't feel like theft. It felt like being trusted with something sacred. Joe woke her before dawn with a knock on her bedroom door. Come with me, he said through the wood, not waiting for an answer. She heard his footsteps retreat toward the elevator. Maureen pulled on jeans and Elena's gray sweater. It was hers now, she decided and followed. The elevator carried them up instead of down, opening onto the building's private rooftop garden. The city spread below them in pre-dawn blue, still sleeping, 1,000 windows dark. The air was cold enough to see her breath, clean in a way Manhattan air never was at street level. Joe walked to the far corner where raised beds formed neat rows, wooden frames holding dark soil. He crouched beside them, running his fingers over plants Maureen recognized from cooking shows she'd watched in better times.
Rosemary.
Basil.
Thyme.
His hands moved with practiced care, checking leaves, pinching off dead growth. Elena started this, he said, his voice quiet against the city's distant hum. Said even men like me need something that grows instead of dies. His fingers lingered on a sprig of rosemary, and his expression softened into something that looked like prayer. I keep it going. Reminds me I'm capable of something other than, he stopped. Didn't finish. A wounded pigeon limped across the concrete near them, one wing dragging useless, feathers matted with dried blood. It moved in painful circles, disoriented, dying slow. Joe stood, watching it with the same careful attention he'd given the herbs. Then he crouched again, moving toward the bird with a gentleness Maureen hadn't known men like him possessed. The pigeon tried to flee but couldn't. Joe's hands closed around it carefully, securely, holding it against his chest. Broken wing, he said, examining the injury with clinical precision. Probably won't survive. Maureen waited for him to end its suffering. That's what you did with broken things in a world this cruel. You ended them quick before the pain dragged on. She'd seen enough death to know mercy when it looked necessary. But Joe didn't snap its neck. Instead, he shrugged off his jacket, expensive, probably worth more than her old apartment's deposit, and wrapped the bird carefully, creating a nest of cashmere and warmth. He carried it to a sheltered corner, set it down near a shallow dish he filled with water from a nearby spigot. But not everything broken is meant to die, he murmured, more to the bird than to her. Maureen stared at him. This man whose name made grown men flinch, this mafia boss with blood on his hands and enemies in their graves, crouched beside a dying pigeon like it mattered. Like its small life was worth saving even when the odds were stacked impossible. I don't understand you, she said finally. The words came out softer than she meant them. The world says you're a killer. But you're up here before dawn growing herbs and saving birds. Joe stood, brushing dirt from his hands. His expression was distant, like he was looking at something only he could see. The world sees a killer, he agreed. But Elena saw a man who could grow things. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw the war being waged behind them. I'm trying to remember which one is true. Maureen's throat tightened. No one had ever let her see behind their armor like this. Everyone she'd known kept their masks welded on, showing only what was safe, what was convenient. But Joe stood here in the dawn light, stripped of his usual control, letting her witness the contradictions he carried. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me see." Joe's jaw worked like he was swallowing something sharp. Then he nodded once, picked up his pigeon-stained jacket, and headed back toward the elevator. But before the doors closed, he looked back at her standing among the herbs, and something almost like hope flickered across his face. The knocking came harsh and insistent, rattling through the penthouse like gunfire. Maureen looked up from the hotel payroll spreadsheet she'd been reviewing, her heart already climbing into her throat. Joe was across town at a meeting with his construction foreman. Victor had driven him. She was alone. The knocking came again, harder. Demanding. She crossed the marble foyer on unsteady legs and checked the security screen. 3 men stood in the hallway. 2 wearing FBI windbreakers, badges visible on their belts, and 1 in an expensive charcoal suit that looked tailored and wrong at the same time. The suited man turned slightly, and Maureen's blood turned to ice. Marcus Hale. Her mother's brother. The man who'd disappeared the moment the cancer diagnosis came. The moment the bills started piling up like snow in a storm. The man who'd promised to help and then vanished, leaving Maureen to drown alone. Her hand shook on the door handle. She considered not opening it. Considered calling Joe. But the men had badges, and she'd spent too many years being afraid of authority to ignore them now. She opened the door. "Hello, Maureen," Marcus said, his smile sharp and cold as a knife drawn slow. It didn't reach his eyes, didn't reach anything human. "Long time. What do you want?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The agent stepped forward, badges flashing. "Miss Augustus, we're here to take you into protective custody. You're a material witness in an ongoing racketeering investigation against Joseph Rem." The words hit her like fists. Material witness. Racketeering. They knew about Joe. They knew about her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, stepping back. Her hand reached for the door. Marcus's smile sharpened into something cruel. "You don't have a choice, sweetheart. You're coming with us." He moved forward, filling the doorway with his bulk, his expensive cologne choking the air. "Unless you want your mother's medical care to stop. Hospital funding can be unpredictable." Maureen's phone was on the counter. She lunged for it. One of the agents blocked her path, his hand firm on her arm. "Miss Augustus, Mr. Rem doesn't control you anymore. We're here to help." "I don't need." The elevator chimed. The sound cut through the tension like a blade through silk. The door slid open, and Joe stepped out, flanked by Vincent, his lieutenant, a man built like a concrete wall with eyes that had seen too much. Joe wore his black suit, perfectly pressed, but something in his expression had gone absolutely still. Predatory. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Joe's eyes swept the scene. Marcus in his doorway, the agents with their hands on Maureen, her pale face and shaking hands. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, lethal and calm and more terrifying than any shout could ever be. "Take your hands off her. Now." The agent holding Maureen's arm released her like she'd caught fire. Marcus's smile faltered, just slightly, just enough to show the fear underneath. Vincent moved to the side, positioning himself between the elevator and the door, blocking any exit. Joe walked forward slowly, each step measured, each movement promising violence held on the thinnest leash. He didn't look at the agents. He looked at Marcus, and his dark eyes held nothing but cold, patient murder. "You have 3 seconds to tell me why you're in my home," Joe said softly, touching what's mine. The tension was explosive, a wire pulled so tight the air itself felt dangerous. Both agents reached for their weapons, hands hovering over holstered guns. Joe didn't flinch,
Didn't even blink.
he just stood there, utterly still, like a storm waiting to break. "Those badges real?" Joe asked, his voice conversational and cold. "Or did Marcus buy them at a costume shop?" Vincent pulled a tablet from inside his jacket, fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. His expression remained neutral, professional, as he pulled up federal databases. "These agents aren't on active duty, boss. Both suspended pending internal investigation 2 months ago." His eyes flicked to the paperwork one agent was holding. And that warrant's a forgery. Bad one, too. Wrong judge's signature. Marcus's mask slipped, just for a second. Fear flickered behind his eyes before he smothered it with bravado. You think you're untouchable, Rem? You think your money and your reputation make you. Joe stepped forward, cutting off Marcus's words with sheer presence. A predator closing in on wounded prey. I think you're a coward who sold out his own niece to cover your gambling debts. His voice dropped lower, each word a blade. I think you owe the Volkov family $500,000, and you're trying to trade Maureen's location for more time. How am I doing so far? Maureen's world tilted sideways. The words crashed over her like ice water. You knew. Her voice cracked. About Marcus? About what he? I know everything about the people who threaten what's mine, Joe said, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. I'm not yours. The words burst out of Maureen before she could stop them, sharp and desperate and true. Joe finally looked at her, and something fierce and possessive burned in his dark gaze, something that made her breath catch, made her heart hammer against her ribs. No, he agreed, his voice rough. You're not. But I'll burn this city down before I let him take you. Marcus laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Touching. Really? But she's still leaving. You can't fight federal agents, Rem. Even you have limits. They're not federal agents, Vincent said flatly. They're criminals impersonating officers. Which means no rules apply. Joe finished, his hand moving inside his jacket. Stop. Maureen's voice cut through the room, surprising everyone, including herself. She stepped forward, moving between Joe and Marcus, her hands shaking but her spine straight. Just stop. Marcus sneered. Maureen, sweetheart, you don't understand what you're.
No.
I'm not. Because for the first time in my life, someone actually asked what I wanted instead of deciding for me. She looked at Marcus, and all the fear she'd carried for him, for his judgment, his abandonment, his cruelty, evaporated into something harder. Something like rage. You left us. You left Mom when she needed you most. And now you show up with fake badges and threats because you gambled away money you didn't have. She turned to Joe, and her voice steadied, found its center. And I choose to stay. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Marcus's face contorted with fury. The fake agents exchanged glances, clearly calculating whether their payday was worth what was about to happen. Vincent moved closer to the door, blocking their only exit. Joe's expression softened, just slightly, just enough for Maureen to see the relief beneath the rage. You heard her, he said quietly, his attention shifting back to Marcus. She made her choice. Now you make yours. Leave walking, or leave in pieces. I'm comfortable with either. Comment, family doesn't mean betrayal if you can't stand users like Marcus who exploit their own blood. Real family protects. Marcus was gone, escorted out by Vincent and two men whose badges were actually real, whose investigation would actually matter. The penthouse felt hollow in his absence, like a room after an explosion, all ringing silence and scattered debris. Maureen found Joe on the rooftop. He stood at the railing, hands braced against cold metal, city lights reflecting in his dark eyes like stars drowning in oil. The herb garden behind him was still, peaceful, utterly disconnected from the violence that had nearly erupted 80 floors below. He didn't turn when she approached, but his shoulders tensed, just slightly, just enough for her to notice. You didn't have to protect me like that, she said quietly. Joe's laugh was bitter, scraped raw. Yes, I did. Silence stretched between them, vast and fragile. The city hummed below, oblivious to the small war that had been waged in a marble foyer, oblivious to everything except its own relentless heartbeat. Elena died because I couldn't protect her. Joe's voice was so quiet she almost missed it. Because I was arrogant and thought my reputation was armor enough. I've spent 3 years making sure nothing touches me again. He turned finally, and his face was stripped of every defense, every carefully maintained wall. And then you walked in wearing rags and terror, and I saw someone who deserved better. Someone I could actually save. Maureen's throat tightened until breathing hurt. I'm not a project, Joe. No, he agreed, stepping closer. The space between them collapsed like a held breath finally released. You're the first person in years who looks at me and doesn't see a monster or a meal ticket. You see me. His hand reached up, rough fingers impossibly gentle as they tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. That's dangerous, Maureen. For both of us. She didn't pull away.
Didn't flinch.
Maybe I'm tired of being safe. Something in Joe fractured. The last thread of control he'd been holding with white knuckles and clenched jaw. He kissed her, and it was fierce, desperate. 3 years of loneliness and longing poured into one moment. His hands framed her face like she was something precious, something breakable, something worth the risk of letting the world in again. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he whispered against her lips, "If you stay, there's no going back. My world will try to destroy you." Maureen's response was steady, sure, the voice of someone who'd survived too much to be afraid of what came next. Then we destroy it first. Joe's smile was small, real, the first genuine joy she'd seen cross his face since Elena's ghost walked these halls. He pulled her close, and for the first time since she'd stepped into his penthouse wearing rags and terror, Maureen felt like she'd finally stopped falling. 2 weeks later, Marcus returned with an army. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped into the penthouse flanked by a man built like a nightmare, the Volkov family's enforcer, all cold eyes and calculated violence. Behind them, 2 legitimate federal agents with a warrant that looked real enough to matter, even if every word on it was a fabrication wrapped in legal language. "Maureen Augustus," one agent announced, "you're under arrest as an accomplice in organized racketeering." Joe's security team materialized from shadows, Vincent and 4 others, weapons drawn, transforming the marble foyer into a powder keg with lit fuses. The air itself felt combustible, every breath a countdown to blood on expensive floors. "Panic room," Joe said, his voice sharp as broken glass.
Now.
Maureen didn't move. "This is my life. I'm not hiding anymore." Marcus's smile was triumphant, cruel. "There she is. Always did have a backbone, didn't she?" He stepped forward, savoring every word. "Shame your mother's treatment gets cut off if you don't cooperate." Joe went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that came before hurricanes, before executions. "You just signed your death warrant." His gun rose, steady and sure, aimed directly at Marcus's head. Maureen stepped in front of the barrel.
No.
Joe's voice was ragged, stripped of everything except desperation. "Maureen, move."
No.
She stood firm, the gun's cold metal inches from her chest. "He doesn't get to make me the reason you become more of what you're trying not to be." She turned to face Marcus, and her voice carried the strength of every hardship she'd survived. Every night, she'd chosen her mother's medication over food. Every moment she'd refused to break. "You sold me out. You abandoned Mom. You've spent your whole life using people." Her eyes blazed. "But I'm done being used. You have no power over me anymore." Vincent's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his grin was sharp as a knife finding home. "Boss. Feds just raided Marcus's office. Found enough evidence of trafficking, fraud, and conspiracy to put him away for life." He looked up, eyes dancing with dark satisfaction. "Seems someone sent them an anonymous tip package an hour ago." Joe's smile was razor-sharp, predatory. "Seems so." The penthouse doors burst open, real FBI agents this time, legitimate badges and legal authority flooding the space. They moved with precision, handcuffing Marcus even as he screamed threats, promises of revenge that rang hollow against federal charges. The Volkov enforcer melted backward, disappearing into the elevator without a word, no longer interested in a lost cause. Joe lowered his weapon slowly, looking at Maureen with something like awe, like he was seeing her for the first time. "You stopped me." She reached up, touching his face with gentle fingers. "I saved you." 3 months later, spring transformed Manhattan into something almost hopeful. Maureen stood at the penthouse windows, watching sunrise paint the city gold. Her mother was in remission, truly, fully in remission. The chemotherapy had worked. The anonymous donation Joe had made covered everything: treatment, recovery, a small apartment near the hospital where her mother could heal without fear of eviction notices or debt collectors. The legitimate businesses thrived under Maureen's management. The hotels ran efficiently. The restaurants turned profit. The construction company had landed 3 major contracts. Everything had fallen into place like pieces of a life she'd never dared imagine. Joe entered carrying coffee, wearing a soft gray t-shirt instead of his usual armor of suits and shadows. He looked younger somehow, lighter, like something he'd been carrying had finally been set down. He placed a small box on the table between them. "I have something for you." Maureen opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a key card to a penthouse apartment 10 blocks away, deed in her name, paid in full. Her breath caught. "You're free, Maureen. Completely." Joe's voice was steady, careful, like he was handling something fragile. "Your own place. Your own life. You never have to see me again if you don't want to." Her eyes burned with tears she didn't try to hide. "And if I want to?" Joe produced a second box, this one velvet, small enough to fit in his palm. Inside, a diamond ring surrounded by smaller stones that caught the sunrise and threw light across the table like captured stars. His dark eyes held hers, vulnerable and fierce all at once. "Then, I'm asking you to choose danger. Choose a life where threats are real and enemies are many. Choose me, knowing I can't promise safety. I can only promise that I will fight for you until my last breath." Maureen took the ring, slid it onto her finger where it fit perfectly, like everything else he'd ever given her, like he'd known exactly what she needed before she did. "I choose you. Not because you saved me, but because you gave me the freedom to choose it all. That's the most dangerous thing, loving someone who makes you brave." She kissed him as the sun fully rose, flooding the penthouse with golden light. "So, let's be dangerous together." Joe pulled her close, and for the first time in 3 years, the penthouse felt like home instead of a mausoleum. 2 broken people, choosing each other in a world that tried to destroy them both. Outside, the city woke, full of threats, full of possibilities, full of a future they'd build on their own terms. If you believe love means giving freedom, not taking it, and you despise controllers and manipulators, hit that subscribe button right now. Only the Marcus Hales of the world won't. Don't be like Marcus. Thank you for experiencing Maureen and Joe's story. If you're still here, if you believe in redemption, second chances, and the power of choice, then you're part of this community. Subscribe, like, and comment which moment hit you hardest. We're building something real here. Don't let the cynics and exploiters win. Choose connection. Choose courage.
Choose to stay.